I canceled my brother's $19,000 worth of wedding gifts after he mocked my job. So on his wedding day, I gave him a single box. Inside was a list of every gift he was about to receive. And the look on his face was worth it. The cookout was already in full swing by the time I stepped into the backyard. The smell of grilled chicken and charred vegetables hung in the air, carried by the soft wind that rattled the paper plates stacked near the food table. The long patio table stretched across the deck, lined with family and a few neighbors who might as well have been family. Kids darted between lawn chairs, chasing each other with foam water toys while the grown-ups laughed in bursts that came and went like waves. I set my drink down, slid into the only open seat halfway down the table, and nodded at the faces around me. Everyone looked at ease, caught up in the rhythm of casual conversation and half-heard jokes. My brother, Aaron, sat at the far end, angled so he could see everyone. He liked holding court, liked having the attention orbit around him. His fiancée, Lila, leaned into him, smiling at whoever happened to be talking. She had that calm, collected way of listening that made people want to tell her more than they should. Aaron's eyes found mine almost immediately. There was a faint smirk already forming, the kind that meant he'd been waiting for something. I'd seen it before: high school dinners, college reunions, holiday gatherings. He liked to land his jokes early in the night, set the tone. This time was no different. He raised his glass slightly, the light catching the edge of the rim. "Glad to see my little brother here," he said, voice just loud enough to make the conversations around us pause. His grin widened, still pretending that his job is a real career. The line was timed perfectly, like he'd rehearsed it in front of the mirror that morning. Laughter broke out instantly, cousins snickering, uncles chuckling, even one of the neighbors at the far end letting out a short, sharp laugh. The sound traveled down the table in a ripple, and by the time it reached me, I could already feel the weight of all their eyes. Mom shook her head with a half-smile, that familiar boys will be boys, look that wasn't really disapproval so much as resignation. Dad didn't say anything, just took another bite of food, eyes fixed on his plate. I smiled. It wasn't forced. I took a sip from my glass, set it down, and nodded like he'd said something clever. I didn't bother to defend myself. I didn't point out that my not-real job had quietly tripled its revenue this year. I didn't mention the contract signed in the last quarter alone would cover his salary for the next decade. And I certainly didn't bring up the people in my network who could buy half the properties in this neighborhood before dessert. None of that mattered. I'd learned a long time ago that facts don't stick in moments like this. What sticks is what you let them believe, and what you do after. Because I already had a plan. It had started months earlier, without much urgency, just a quiet idea that took shape on its own. Aaron's wedding was coming up, and I wanted to give him something that would land. Not just a gift, but a statement. Something that would feel impossible to ignore. I started with calls to a few business partners. Then I reached out to clients who'd once told me, "If you ever need a favor, just ask." A few friends from out of state came in on it too, sending me lists of suppliers they trusted. Piece by piece, the plan grew. Orders placed. Shipping dates set. Every single item scheduled to arrive within 48 hours of the wedding. A $4,500 honeymoon package to Santorini, booked through one of my clients in travel hospitality. A $2,800 high-end espresso machine, the exact model he'd once pointed out in a magazine. $6,000 in home furnishing credits from a luxury interior store he and Lila had visited last winter, but left empty-handed from. Dozens of smaller gifts, professional kitchen knives, personalized glassware, handcrafted linens. Every detail designed to make the first months of their marriage feel charmed. The total came to just over $19,000. All of it paid for. All of it ready. The morning after his career joke at the cookout, I woke up early. The light in my kitchen was barely there, just the thin gray of pre-dawn. I made coffee and opened my laptop. My inbox was full of shipping confirmations and "your order is on the way" notices. One by one, I canceled them. Refunds processed. Orders pulled. Addresses deleted. Any record that might have tied them back to me gone. I didn't rush. It took less than 2 hours. By the time the sun was up, the plan had shifted. No one else knew. Not the business partners, not the friends who had helped me arrange the orders. And definitely not my family. In the weeks that followed, Aaron sent me short updates about the wedding preparations. Venues booked, suits fitted, seating charts argued over. I responded when I needed to, kept my replies brief, and made sure not to drop any hints. By the time the wedding day arrived, the memory of that cookout had faded for most of them. Not for me. The venue was a converted barn on the edge of town. String lights wound through the rafters, long tables dressed with white tablecloths, rows of chairs set up in perfect symmetry. Guests milled around in dresses and suits, balancing plates from the buffet, while the photographer floated between them, snapping candid shots. When the ceremony was over and the music shifted into the reception playlist, people began settling in for speeches and gifts. I waited, watched. My turn came later in the evening, after most of the others had already presented their neatly wrapped boxes and handwritten cards. Aaron was seated beside Lila at the head table, a small stack of gifts already forming at their feet. I stepped forward with one small box in my hands, neatly wrapped, unremarkable. Aaron's eyes lit up when he saw it. He must have thought it was part of some bigger reveal, that this was just the beginning. His grin returned, almost exactly like the one at the cookout. He tore away the wrapping in a few quick motions, lifted the lid, then froze. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. He unfolded it slowly. His eyes scanned the page, moving down the list line by line. The $4,500 honeymoon package. The $2,800 espresso machine. The $6,000 in home furnishings. Every smaller item listed clearly. At the bottom, centered in clean black type. But you said my job isn't real. I watched the color drain from his face. Lila glanced at the page, her smile faltering. She looked at him, then back at the paper. Conversations at nearby tables dipped, curiosity drawing people's attention toward us. A couple of guests leaned in to catch a better look. I didn't say a word, just smiled, turned, and walked back to my seat. That single look on his face, frozen between embarrassment and disbelief, was worth more than every gift on that list. The drive home from the wedding was quiet. I had the windows down, letting the cool night air cut through the leftover music and chatter still clinging to my thoughts. The image of Aaron holding that paper was sharp, as if my mind had decided it was worth keeping in high resolution. 2 days later, my phone rang. His name lit up the screen. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes after that, Lila called. Same result. The messages they left weren't confrontational, not yet. Aaron's voice was tight, circling around the same question. Why? Lila's tone was calmer, but there was an edge to it, like she was trying to keep her composure for the sake of sounding reasonable. I didn't respond to either. By the weekend, Mom reached out. She didn't ask about the gift directly. She asked if something had happened between us lately. I told her I'd been busy. She didn't push, but I could tell she wanted to. Meanwhile, word from the wedding started leaking out. Families are built on conversations you're not meant to hear, but you always do. Cousin Mark called to catch up and casually mentioned he'd been at a brunch where someone brought up the paper gift I'd given Aaron. Apparently, the story had already split into 2 versions. In one, I was making some kind of elaborate joke that didn't land. In the other, I was making a point that everyone at that table understood instantly. Aaron hated not being in control of the narrative. Always had. In high school, if a rumor started about him, he'd find out who said it within the day. Now, with his own wedding as the setting, he had no way to shape the story without making himself look worse. That was the part I'd counted on. I didn't block his calls. I wanted him to wonder whether I was ignoring him or just not picking up at the right time. That space, the uncertainty, was where the pressure lived. By the second week, he sent me a long text. It started with a vague attempt at humor, something about, "You've always had a flair for drama," then shifted into questions about whether I was trying to embarrass him. He said Lila had been upset, that the whole thing had cast a shadow over the honeymoon. I read it twice, then put the phone down. I knew what that shadow really was. Not the list itself, but the truth behind it, that I had been willing to give him something valuable, then chose not to. that the only reason he didn't have it was because of what he'd said. It wasn't about money. It was about control. I kept working like nothing had changed. Meetings, calls, deadlines. Clients happy. Projects ahead of schedule. If anything, my focus sharpened. I could feel the difference, knowing that while Aaron was busy trying to fix how people saw him, I was moving forward without him. 3 weeks after the wedding, I saw them in person for the first time. A small family dinner at my parents' house. No special occasion, just one of those nights Mom liked to put together. I knew they'd be there. I also knew they wouldn't skip it. That would look like retreat, and Aaron didn't retreat. When I arrived, they were already in the kitchen. Lila smiled politely, but her eyes didn't hold it. Aaron gave me a nod, nothing more. Mom moved between us with small talk, setting plates and checking the oven, acting like there wasn't a current running under every word. We sat down at the table, smaller than the wedding setup, but with the same unspoken hierarchy. Dad at one end, Mom at the other, Aaron across from me. The meal started quietly. Most of the conversation was about harmless topics, weather, traffic, a cousin's new job. Halfway through, Aaron leaned back slightly, his fork resting on the edge of his plate. "So," he said, not looking directly at me, "guess we should talk about the gift." Mom's hand froze halfway to her glass. Lila kept her gaze on her plate. I didn't move. "What about it?" "You made your point," he said, loud and clear. "But maybe next time you want to prove something, you don't do it on someone's wedding day." I let a beat pass. I thought it was the perfect day. His jaw tightened. "You've been holding on to that since the cookout?" I didn't answer. He knew. He glanced at Lila, then back at me. "You could have just told me you didn't like the joke. And you could have just not made it," I said. The air in the room changed. Mom set her fork down gently, the metal barely making a sound against the plate. Aaron leaned forward. "You think this was some big win for you? All you did was make yourself look petty." I smiled faintly. "Seems like it's still bothering you." That shut him up for a moment. Lila shifted in her seat. Dad cleared his throat and asked if anyone wanted dessert. We didn't stay much longer after that. When I left, I caught a glimpse of them in the living room, talking in low voices. Lila's arms were crossed. The next few days, I started hearing from more people. An old friend of Aaron's called to ask what really happened with the wedding gift. A former coworker of his messaged me on social media with a simple, "Nice work." The story wasn't going away. If anything, it was spreading. And with each retelling, the version where I'd made a calculated choice, not a mistake, was the one people believed. Aaron hated that even more than the original moment. 2 months after the wedding, I got an email from a shared acquaintance, someone I'd done business with before, who'd also once worked with Aaron. They'd heard he was trying to get involved in a new project, a real estate development in the next county over. The problem? The investors behind it were part of my network. I didn't have to do much. Just a phone call, casual and friendly. I didn't tell them not to work with him. I just reminded them of the wedding story. Let them connect the dots about what kind of partner he might be. A week later, the deal he'd been chasing fell through. He didn't know I'd had anything to do with it. Not yet. But I knew the cracks were starting to show. And the thing about cracks is, once they start, they only go deeper. By late fall, Aaron was in damage control. I didn't need to be told. I could see it in the way he moved during the few family gatherings we had. He was quieter, measuring his words, as if every sentence had to pass through a filter before it reached the table. The confidence he wore like a second skin had thinned. The wedding list incident hadn't faded the way he'd expected. It lived on in subtle ways. Someone making a half smile when he spoke, a cousin changing the subject when he tried to tell a story, a friend taking a little longer to return his calls. It wasn't open hostility. It was worse. It was the slow erosion of the image he'd spent years building. And then came the opportunity. One of my oldest clients called with a proposal. They were taking over a mid-sized distribution company, a solid business with good margins and a need for a public-facing partner to handle expansion. The deal was practically finished. They just needed someone local to manage the rollout. Aaron's name came up. Not from me. The client mentioned he'd heard Aaron was looking for something new. My client asked what I thought. I didn't give an opinion right away. I asked for a day to think it over. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the folder of documents open in front of me. I could have said nothing, let the deal go through, and watched Aaron step into a role that would give him stability and a clean slate. That would have been the easy path. But the thing about revenge is, once you've committed to it, halfway measures feel like wasted effort. The next morning, I called my client. I told him a version of the truth, that Aaron had a habit of dismissing people's work if it didn't match his view of real careers, that he could be careless with his words, that in a public role, those habits might surface at the wrong moment. I never told him not to hire Aaron. I didn't have to. By the end of the week, the role went to someone else. Aaron found out a few days later. He didn't call me. Instead, he showed up at my office. I was finishing a call when I saw him through the glass. He didn't sit in the waiting area, just stood there until I waved him in. He closed the door behind him. "You cost me that job." I leaned back in my chair. "I didn't think you wanted my help." He stepped closer to the desk. "Don't play dumb. You've been trying to cut me down since the wedding. I'm done pretending it's something else." I met his stare. "You made it clear what you thought of my work." I returned the favor. "That was a joke," he said. "It was disrespect," I said. His voice rose. "Over one comment? You're burning the ground just to watch me sink." I stayed quiet. He shook his head. "You think this makes you better than me? All it makes you is bitter." "That's your problem," I said. "You think everything's about being better. Sometimes it's just about not letting someone walk over you twice." We stood there for a moment. The silence stretched tight. Finally, he turned and left without another word. A week passed. Then another. No calls, no texts. At Thanksgiving, he and Lila stayed away. Mom said they were visiting her family, but I knew better. By December, I'd almost closed the book on it. Not because I'd forgotten, but because there was nothing left to take. His work prospects were stalled. His reputation in our circle had shifted. The story from the wedding still hung around him like a shadow he couldn't shake. Then the final thread presented itself. I got an email from the travel company that had handled the honeymoon package I'd canceled. The credits, refunded to me months ago, were still valid for rebooking. They asked if I wanted to use them before the year ended. That was when I decided how the story would end. I booked the trip. Same dates as Aaron's original honeymoon. Same island. First-class flights. Upgraded suite. And I invited 2 clients who had become close friends, people who knew the backstory and didn't mind enjoying the view. We landed to clear skies and warm air. The hotel staff greeted us by name, the same way they would have greeted him. The week was perfect, sun, food, quiet. And every so often, I thought about how he'd imagined this trip as his. On the last night, sitting on the balcony with the ocean spread out below, I sent one message. No explanation. Just a photo of the sunset from the suite, the same view that had been on the brochure I'd once planned to give him. He didn't reply. When I flew home, I knew it was over. There was nothing left for him to salvage from the pieces I'd left. And I didn't need to say anything else. The silence between us was permanent now, not from avoidance, but from finality.